Jesus and Muhammad, two of the most influential figures in history. Billions follow them, but here's the big question. Can they both be right? If their teachings contradict each other, can they really lead to the same God? What if one path leads to life and the other doesn't? In this video, we're putting Jesus and Muhammad side by side, comparing their lives, their claims, their impact, and the evidence behind them. Who backed up their message with undeniable proof, and who falls short? By the end, you'll see why one offers eternal life and the other simply cannot. Let's dive into the facts, the history, and the truth that matters most. Please watch till the end so that you don't miss any point or quote me out of context. Point number 1, claims to divinity. Let's begin with the foundation of their identities. Jesus Christ made bold and direct claims to divinity, claims that left no room for neutrality. In John 10 verse 30, Jesus declared, "I and the Father are one," a statement so explicit that his Jewish audience tried to stone him for blasphemy. Similarly, in John 14 verse 6, he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." These aren't the words of a mere prophet. They are the claims of someone who identified as the Son of God. Even in the Old Testament, the prophecy of Isaiah 9 verse 6 speaks of the coming Messiah, calling him Mighty God and Everlasting Father. Jesus consistently presented himself as the fulfillment of these prophecies, not just a messenger, but God in human flesh. Now let's look at Muhammad. Muhammad made no such claims to divinity. In fact, the Quran itself emphasizes his humanity. In Quran 18 verse 110, Muhammad is instructed to say, "I am only a man like you, to whom it has been revealed that your God is one God." So it is clear that Muhammad positioned himself solely as a prophet and messenger, never as divine. This difference is striking. One figure claims to be God incarnate, offering himself as the way to eternal life. The other insists he's only a man pointing to God. So here's the question for you. Can a mere man lead us to God? Or do we need someone who is God? But claims are just words without proof. Let's take a closer look at the evidence, miracles and prophecies. Did Jesus back up his words? Did Muhammad? The answer will surprise you. Point number 2, miracles and prophecies. Words can inspire, but miracles validate. Jesus didn't just make bold statements. He demonstrated divine power through undeniable miracles. Picture the scene in John 6 verse 19. The disciples are on a boat in the middle of the stormy sea, terrified. Then Jesus walks on the water toward them, not on calm, shallow waters, but on roaring waves. This wasn't a trick, it was power over creation itself. In John 11 verse 38 to 44, Jesus performs what is arguably one of his greatest miracles, raising Lazarus from the dead. Imagine the disbelief and awe as he commands a man dead for 4 days to come out of the tomb, and Lazarus walks out alive. This miracle wasn't hidden, it was witnessed by a crowd, many of whom couldn't deny what they had seen. Jesus healed the blind, cured the lepers, and fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Mark 6 verse 30 to 44. These weren't private events. They were public, verifiable, and left no room for doubt. Now what about Muhammad of the Muslims? Well, the Quran is often called his greatest miracle, but it's a miracle based on its literary style and not physical evidence. Muhammad himself admitted in Quran 29 verse 50 that his people asked for signs and miracles, but his response was that he was simply a messenger. Islamic tradition later attributes miracles to Muhammad, like splitting the moon. But these are not documented in the Quran itself, and they lack the eyewitness verification that accompanies the miracles of Jesus. Here's the key difference. Jesus' miracles were physical, public, and undeniable. They proved his authority over nature, disease, and even death itself. Muhammad's miracles, by contrast, rely heavily on subjective belief, rather than tangible evidence. Miracles demonstrate power, but what about their teachings? Were their messages consistent with divine truth? Let's compare the moral authority and teachings of Jesus and Muhammad next. Point number 3, teachings and moral authority. A true prophet or divine figure must not only speak the truth, but also embody moral perfection. This was very practical in the life of Jesus. His teachings were radical, so radical that they turned the moral expectations of his time upside down. In Matthew 5 verse 44, Jesus says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Imagine that. Not just tolerating your enemies, but actively loving and praying for them. He preached forgiveness, not revenge. On the cross, as he was being mocked and executed, he cried out in Luke 23 verse 34, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Who else forgives their executioners in their dying moments? In Matthew 5 verse 39, Jesus commands, "If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." This wasn't a call to weakness, but a challenge to show restraint and love in the face of aggression. His entire life was a model of humility, compassion, and self-sacrifice. His moral teachings were consistent with the perfect holiness of God. Now let's look at Muhammad. While he preached certain virtues like charity and justice, his actions often contradict the idea of moral perfection. Muhammad married multiple women, including Aisha, a girl widely reported to have been just 6 years old at the time of the marriage, and 9 years old when the marriage was consummated. Sahih al-Bukhari, 5133. This raises serious moral questions about the example he set for his followers. Additionally, Muhammad's approach to warfare was controversial. In Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith 1 verse 234, he permitted the taking of captives in war, including women, some of whom were reportedly forced into marriage or concubinage. This practice stands in stark contrast to Jesus, who never wielded political or military power and taught his followers to reject violence altogether. Matthew 26:52. Muhammad also approved of the killing of individuals who insulted him or rejected Islam. Historical accounts, such as the assassination of the poetess Asma bint Marwan, show Muhammad condoning or directly ordering retribution against critics. Such actions raise serious concerns about his moral example as a prophet. The contrast is striking. Jesus' teachings and actions are consistent with the holiness, love, and forgiveness of God. Muhammad's actions reflect the struggles and flaws of a man operating within a tribal, warlike culture. Now let me ask you, which example aligns with the perfect, holy God? The one who preached and lived love, or the one whose actions often contradict divine moral perfection? But teaching alone is not enough. Let's see how their lives align with prophecy. Did either fulfill divine predictions, or do their stories fall apart under scrutiny? Point number 4, historical and prophetic fulfillment. History tells a story, but prophecy reveals the author. Let's look at how Jesus Christ and Muhammad align, or fail to align, with divine prophecy. The life of Jesus was foretold centuries before his birth. The prophet Isaiah, writing 700 years before Jesus, described a suffering servant in Isaiah 53:5. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Sound familiar? Jesus' crucifixion fits this prophecy perfectly, down to the detail of being pierced. Micah 5:2 foretold that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. Jesus wasn't just born in Bethlehem by chance. His birth location was divinely orchestrated, fulfilling prophecy. And it doesn't stop there. Zechariah 9:9 predicted the Messiah would enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey, a moment we see fulfilled in the Gospels during the triumphal entry. Over 300 Old Testament prophecies point directly to Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. This level of precision is impossible without divine inspiration. Now, what about Muhammad? The Quran does not claim that Muhammad fulfills biblical prophecy, nor do earlier scriptures point to him. Islamic scholars often argue that Deuteronomy 18:18 refers to Muhammad, but the context clearly points to a prophet from among the Israelites, Jesus, not Muhammad. Muhammad himself sought validation for his message, but his life lacks the direct fulfillment of prophecy that we see with Jesus. Where Jesus stands as the culmination of centuries of divine planning, Muhammad appears as a figure unconnected to the prophetic timeline of the Bible. The weight of prophecy tips the scales heavily in Jesus' favor. He wasn't just a historical figure, he was the promised Messiah who came to fulfill God's plan for humanity. But prophecy tells us who these men claim to be, but what about their ultimate legacy? What happened after their deaths? Point number 5, death and resurrection versus death and burial. Death is inevitable, but what happens after? This is where the stories of Jesus and Muhammad take dramatically different turns. Jesus' death wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a movement that changed history. He predicted both his death and resurrection multiple times, and then he delivered. In Matthew 28, verse 5-6, the angel declares to the women at the tomb, "He is not here, he has risen, just as he said." The empty tomb wasn't a hidden secret, it was public knowledge. In fact, over 500 eyewitnesses saw the resurrected Jesus. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3-8. These weren't hallucinations or hearsay. These were people whose lives were transformed by encountering the risen Christ. The resurrection is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. Without it, as Paul states in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. Jesus didn't just die. He conquered death, proving he has the authority to give eternal life to those who believe in him. Now compare this with Muhammad. He died in 632 AD of natural causes, and his body remains buried in Medina to this day. While his followers continue to honor his legacy, his death marked the end of his earthly life. There are no claims of resurrection, no miracles surrounding his death, just finality. Here lies the ultimate question: who holds the keys to eternal life? Jesus, who rose from the grave and proved his victory over death, or Muhammad, who remains buried, unable to conquer the very thing all humanity fears? You must agree with me that the evidence speaks for itself. Jesus Christ didn't just claim to be the truth, he lived it, demonstrated it, and proved it through his miracles, his teachings, and ultimately his resurrection. He fulfilled centuries-old prophecies, conquered death, and offered a path to eternal life. Muhammad, while an influential historical figure, made no claims to divinity, performed no public miracles, and left no evidence of supernatural confirmation. His teachings and actions reflect the limitations of humanity, not the perfection of a holy God. So here's the ultimate question: who do you trust with your eternity? The one who rose from the grave, offering forgiveness and eternal life, or a man whose story ends in a tomb? This is more than history. This is about your soul. Jesus said in John 14, verse 6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." If this is true, then your eternity depends on your response to him. The choice is yours. Will you follow the one who proved he is God, or will you settle for less? Today, you stand at the crossroads of truth. Choose wisely.